Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skeptic's Guide to Investing. Today, myself, Steve Davenport, and Clem Miller are going to talk about the European elections and what's happening in the world. Are we moving to the right? And if we are, how quickly? Is it going to change as we go forward this year, or have we seen the worst of it? I think that this is one topic that we could talk about forever because there is constant change in what's happening in the European Union. There's constant change in what's happening in the ground in Ukraine, and there's constantly questions about energy and energy usage coming up into, I've already heard that the winter in Ukraine is going to be very bad because the grid is being destroyed now by Russia. So there's a lot happening in this space, and because I need somebody smarter and better at this than I am, I'm going to have Clem start to lead this topic off. And we can talk a little bit about G7, recent elections, and in France. There's just a lot happening. And I think sometimes as Americans, we think what we have in the 48 contiguous is what really matters. But in reality, we are a global economy, and we are an economy that influences where exports and imports, and we have to realize how some of these decisions that are being made away from our shores does really impact us as investors and us as citizens of the world. So what do you think is happening, Clem, with these election results? And where would you start in terms of priorities and understanding?
So, Steve, let me just say, first of all, thank you very much. And there's something in what you just said now in the introduction that I really wanted to emphasize, which is how, U.S. companies really depend a lot on the rest of the world. In fact, something like 40% of S&P 500 earnings come from outside the United States. And of course, the reverse is true as well. Many European companies depend on their U.S. business. Asian companies depend on their U.S. business, et cetera. So let me, to your question about the European elections and what's going on there, I have a few points. Steve, feel free to jump in at any time. Otherwise, I'll just run right through my points. So first of all,
skeptical of you today, Clem.
What?
I'm going to be skeptical of you today.
Okay, thanks for being skeptical. Okay, so first of all, the Greens and the left lost a lot of seats in these European Parliament elections. So as a result, we are likely to see less emphasis on climate change and sustainability. These will be de-emphasized to some degree. They were actually big policy initiatives of the European Commission until this parliamentary election. But now I think it's going to be de-emphasized. So that has implications, I think, for the rest of the world on the emphasis on ESG matters. Secondly, as the Greens and the left lost seats, the right wing picked up a lot of seats. Their big issue is migration. So we are likely to see much more stringent laws and action with respect to migration. And there I have to point to Giorgia Meloni, who's the prime minister of Italy, and in some ways the new de facto leader of the European Union countries at the national level. That's her big emphasis is on migration, although it's important to all the right-wing parties in Europe. Third point I'd make is that despite the movement from the left to the right, the center still holds power. The center held during this election. The center right even picked up some seats, while the center left pretty much held on to their seats. So we're not talking about the European Parliament being ruled now by the extreme right wing. We're talking about the center still holding power and the left losing their power to the right. Next point I would make is that the head of the European Commission, which essentially is like saying the EU Prime Minister, has to be approved by the European Parliament. If she continues to get enough support from the centrist parties, she would probably hold on to her position. So we may not even see that much of a change. Well, we probably won't see a change in the prime ministership of the EU in general. That is the head of the European Commission.
Wow.
Next point I would make is that the European Parliament elections are always seen as a kind of a signal for where national politics are going. You know, for example, politics in France, politics in Germany, politics in Italy. And as a signal, it can inform what might happen in these national elections. So
Well,
there's been a
one of
lot
the things,
said.
one of the things I think is interesting is that you went right to the issue of immigration.
Yeah.
And if I was to ask, what does the right want in the United States? I think the issue they will go to first is immigration. It almost seems like this is whenever you want to see people's eyes bug out of their head, you simply mention immigration and you get people on both sides who are excited, right?
Yeah.
Is this an issue because people know it polls and it's significant? Or is this an issue that we're actually bringing up and we're actually going to solve with some of these things? Because it feels to me like it's a siren call to put people into their boxes of you're far left or you're far right. And I can say something about immigration and that's going to upset you and push you over to, one type of opinion, right?
Yeah, I think migration is it's an issue that is easily exploitable. In Europe and to a degree in the United States, there's a feeling that when you have lots of migration from Africa and the Middle East and so on, that the original sort of European Christian identity in Europe is being diminished. And that's actually what Giorgia Meloni and the right wing is exploiting this. In fact, what the parties that picked up a lot of the votes, the party is actually called, the coalition in the European Parliament is actually called the Identity Party. So that goes to that nature of the, what is the true European identity? And you have that less in the US. You have some folks in the US who abide by that, but it's less of an issue in the United States. But you're right, migration is a big issue that politicians can exploit. There are people on the left actually who are concerned about migration as well. So it's more important on the right, but it's not something, you don't have a lot of folks out there except maybe in the business community who are pro migration. So you don't lose a lot of, you don't gain a lot of votes by being against restrictions on on migration. But it's a challenging issue. It's really hard to change conditions in those countries where the migrants are coming from. You've got internal European migration. The situation in Ukraine has sent millions and millions of Ukrainians into the EU. So that's been challenging. But it's a big issue, and right now it's a much more important issue in the EU than the whole green sustainability issue. That seems more ephemeral than migration.
Right. My only point is if everybody has this issue, does the issue become so big and so complicated that nobody can make the small steps to improve it? Because it's one of those things that, okay, if you're going to open up this Pandora box, we're going to have to talk about, PhDs and master's degrees in countries and getting in line for citizenship and how do we handle these war-torn areas that are going through disruption. And I think that recently Biden's actions on asylum with Mexico is just kind of shocking that he was so much into supporting and helping the immigrants. And now he seems to be stepping onto I'm a tough Democrat, and I want to, show you how we're seriously addressing the border. And I just don't know, with 6 months to go in the U.S., I can't really tell you whether I think the immigration situation is the same, better, or worse. I think it's just filled with so much, so many pictures of people at the border going through the gates, and being interviewed by 60 Minutes. I mean, I feel like if I wanted to get on 60 Minutes, I would take a trip to the border,
Well, I think there's, this raises an interesting point, and that's one of disinformation. It's very easy to be swayed by disinformation. And I think some of what we've seen in Europe in terms of the swing from left to right actually has to do with disinformation, including disinformation coming out, or maybe especially because of disinformation coming out of Russia, who sees the European right wing as more susceptible to being swayed by Russia than the centrists in Europe. So, and I think that same disinformation from Russia might be influencing, anti-migration politics in the U.S. But I think, like I said, it's migration does cut across. In the U.S., it cuts across various political lines, and there are people on the left who are concerned about jobs for longtime U.S. residents, trying to alleviate poverty that's already here, and they see potential migration as being something that threatens the alleviation of that poverty. But Steve, let me continue on, talk a little bit about some of the implications of this election at the national level in Europe. So, there's been a lot said about the big vote loss of Macron's Renaissance Party in France, and the big vote gain of Le Pen's National Rally Party, which is a right-wing party. So as a result, Macron dissolved parliament and called for new elections. So this is a gamble in that Macron is thinking that this will force the French to decide if they really want a French assembly controlled by the right wing. So it's that kind of a gamble. You might also be thinking that if they do win and they have a period of governing, that people will grow quickly tired of their way of governing and actually throw them out. So that might be the long view position. I tend to think that it's more the force people to think about who they vote for objective. But the important thing to note in France is that the president is elected separately, and Macron has no intention of stepping down before his term ends in May of 2027. So in France, the president has a lot more power than does the prime minister, who's elected by parliament. So the relevance of this, whoever might take over in parliament is less significant in a strong presidency government. Still, a lot of analysts have looked at periods of so-called cohabitation, president and prime minister from different parties, and say that it actually complicates policymaking. Very much like, if the Republicans in the U.S. hold one house and the Democrats hold another house. So it's very, very similar to that. So
one of the things that struck me last week, Clem, was when Biden went to France and he was treated like, royalty. It was a state dinner. It was a very much pomp and circumstance meeting. And I look at it and I said, if I were the president, would I want my meeting to be thought of as pomp and circumstance and celebration? Or would I say, I'm just 4 years in on my 8-year mission? I'm not, it almost felt like he might not be here in 6 months or 9 months. So we're going to honor Biden for all he's done for the world democracy. And it felt a little bit like it was his goodbye tour. And I think that for somebody who looks to be the leader, like, I don't know who you consider to be the leader of democracy in the world. I guess I would say it's the US president, followed closely by Prime Minister in England and Francis. I, how do you look at democracy today, Clem? Is it better, worse, or the same
Than when?
than 4 years ago when Biden took office?
Uh, uh, I think it's about the same as it was. I think
Because it
we
feels like
were,
it's taken some hits.
I think the US was perilously close. This is my own personal political view. I think we were very perilously close to having an overthrow of our government back in 2020 or early 2021. And I think that we're, in a similar perilous mood right now in this country. So I can't say whether it's worse. It's not worse, and it's not better. It's I think essentially the same in this country.
Do you feel like it's a movement looking for a leader? Like, I feel like all of these 80-plus-year-old people in government make me feel like they're not really looking to lead, they're just looking to survive. And that we don't have somebody with that energy, that feeling of excitement that people get behind a new leader who, it seemed like Trudeau was that leader. And then he's gone through his miscues. It seemed like Macron was that leader. And then he's gone through his, it feels to me like where Russia and China are making more of a statement about their alliance and how strong they are. I'm not sure I see the democratic powers, you know, the way they came together around Ukraine was not inspiring to me. It was kind of like we were pointing fingers and we're trying to figure. It feels to me like democracy is more challenged now than it was 4 years ago, and I think it puts us into a bad position going into this election. But maybe I'm just being too skeptical.
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
Well, I think democracy is messy. I think you have different political systems and different political viewpoints in all the different countries in these, in Europe and also the US and Canada and Japan. I think they all have different emphases. I'm actually surprised at how much they were able to do in a collaborative fashion with respect to Ukraine. And a lot of that has to do with the NATO alliance. I don't think if it were the EU, I don't think if there weren't a NATO, Ukraine would be here today. I think the NATO alliance and the fact that there's a command structure there and not sort of this loosey goosey G7, I think actually helped on that.
Okay.
So, Steve, should I turn to my views on Germany?
Yep. Let's turn to Germany.
So in Germany, the AfD party, Alternative for Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, took a lot of seats in the elections, in the European Parliament elections. They are an extreme right-wing party. In fact, they're so extreme that even the far right in the European Parliament doesn't want to associate with them. So there's some thinking that basically they're kind of a successor to the Nazis, a far right party. They're sort of ensconced in parts of the former Eastern Europe. That's where they draw their support from. So there are elections for the Bundestag, for the German parliament in 2025, which must be held before September 2025. So it's still some time away. In the meantime, Olaf Scholz, who's a social democrat, center left, can remain chancellor, although there may be some probability he could step down and let somebody else in his party compete in the elections. But even so, he's got a fairly weak coalition. His coalition is very weak. It's all over the board, and it's possible one of them could pull out. Unlikely, because they won't want to see the AfD enter the government at all. So
to me, I'm a middle child, so I always look at things as a messy middle, and it feels to me like a lot of these governments, well, they were leaning one way, now they're being pulled another way, and it feels like there's more uncertainty in all of the government elections, and that's just because I think we are, in a period of time where there's so many things that are under attack as to what's the right way. How should we do this? How should we do this environmentally? How should we do this from social economics in terms of subsidies? And how should we do this in terms of, onshoring and bringing things back to our country? There just seems to be a lot of issues out there that are making it hard for people to feel behind one type of direction or leadership. And I think it's going to create, if it keeps going and we don't have some leadership established, I think there'll be a vacuum and it'll create an opportunity for Russia or China.
I agree. You don't hear about, at least in the center, you don't hear about new leaders coming forward. You only hear about these existing leaders. I think it's interesting that the one leader who seems to have her power enhanced out of these European Parliament elections is, as I mentioned, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. But even her party grew out of a fascist party from World War II, the so-called Brothers of Italy. And it's not fascist today. It's not the AfD, but it's still very right-wing, very anti-migration. And she seems to be the one who has come out of this, the one major European leader, the one G7 leader who's come out of this European parliamentary election strengthened rather than weakened. I just want to mention one more thing, and I'm done through my notes, Steve, which is that while the UK is not in the EU, as you all know, it's notable that the Conservative Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has himself called elections. He's likely to lose them to Labour Party leader Keir Starmer. And that would actually take the UK to the left. So that's kind of interesting, because even as the rest of Europe tilts somewhat to the right, or at least loses where the left is losing a lot of influence, in the UK, the left is likely to gain some influence. Now, admittedly, Keir Starmer is not like he's sort of the new Labour, the kind of Tony Blair level type Labour, more centrist left, and not like more hardline Labour left, not quasi-Marxist left. So, that's what I would say about these elections, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it goes. And some of the analogies you're drawing between Europe and the U.S., are kind of interesting too, especially the points about migration being an issue in both areas. I think that's relevant. Also, Steve, I would say, we haven't really talked about inflation and other economic issues, and I think that's in the background in what's going on in Europe. Maybe there's maybe the fact that there's been high inflation has, somehow highlighted the migration problem as maybe, people tend to blame economic conditions on migrants. And I think that's the
So whatever's
situation.
new in your neighborhood is what you're going to be drawn to, right?
Yeah. So I think that's the situation in the US as well as in Europe. But I don't think fundamentally that this is that European elections, and maybe not even the US elections, are primarily driven by economics, because on the margin, the economies, the inflation rate, they're improving in Europe and
Yeah.
the US. And this is not like a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We're in a situation of economic improvement, and so it's less likely to affect elections than I think some of these social issues, like migration and other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to wrap with one concept, which is at the G7, they've invited, since it's being hosted by Italy, they invited the Pope to come and lead a conference on or discussion on AI. And I know that I do sometimes go onto the cynical side, but to me, this is just like, first of all, if we thought the G7 leaders together could come up with an AI solution that was going to be good for all the economies, I think we would probably be taken to, for some heavy medication. I think that then you say, we're going to take this leader of a religious group and have him lead the discussion as a, man in his late 70s about artificial intelligence. And I'm sitting there going, is this really happening? Are these people looking for answers? Are these people looking to grandstand? Are these people looking to move this forward? And so when I think about these issues at the end of the day, Clem, I want to ask one question. What do I do to take our views on any of these issues and make my portfolio stronger because of it? And when I look at artificial intelligence, it's the issue of 24, right? It is going to be the issue of the next 5 years or 10 years. And my question is it clear how we take advantage of it? Is it clear what we do? And is it clear that even the governments who sit around at these conferences and say, oh, we understand the issue, we understand the opportunity, and we're going to come together and deliver this for our citizens so that our world is a better place? I think I know my answer, Clem, but maybe you can tell me something that's not completely different.
Well, I think Steve, you've pointed out that this AI discussion kind of is similar to all the discussions that have occurred regarding climate change and sustainability and ESG. I'm not putting those issues down. They're serious issues, very serious issues. And I'm not putting down AI. AI is a very serious issue with potential social benefits.
When unserious people approach a serious issue, do you get an unserious result?
Yeah. When unserious approach a serious issue, well, that's the whole point. I mean, you got to wonder about politicians or public servants who may or may not be experts in a field, especially a cutting edge field, making decisions that could translate into law.
I would go one step further, Clem. You said politicians who may or may not be experts. I would even say they may not even be aware of what the issues are. Never mind being experts on it. I mean, I think you're giving the ruling class a whole lot of ability here that
I'm a little hedged
investing. I
because
don't understand their investment thesis.
Yeah, I'm a little hedged because for a number of years I worked for a government agency that espoused a certain expertise in some areas, and I knew that they're very good experts in that organization, on their field. And so they have something to offer. But I also know that politicians come in every 4 years. This is in the US, every 4 years or every 8 years, and they reinvent things, and they think they know better than the politicians who were there before. And of course, the civil servants take their cues from the politicians. So one has to be very skeptical, to use that expression, of what's going on in terms of these agencies trying to regulate AI. Already, there's a regulation that's come out of the EU on AI, and I don't know. It's got some basic principles, but I don't know if they're going to stand up to the test of time, because this is a very fast evolving area. And a lot of people don't understand. I'll mention one other thing this reminds me of, Steve, at the risk of spending another minute here or two. And that is, I saw that Trump met with some Bitcoin crypto people. He had lunch with them yesterday or the day before. And they were trying to convince him that that crypto and Bitcoin would be a good thing for the U.S. energy sector. Now, you and I and a lot of people know that Bitcoin and crypto, or Bitcoin mining, right, consumes a ton of energy, consumes a lot of energy. And actually, to the extent Bitcoin, as Bitcoin approaches its remaining Bitcoin over the next few decades, starts making Bitcoin at a more expensive rate, so to speak, it's going to consume more and more energy and make energy prices higher if that continues. But they spun it. The Bitcoin crypto people actually spun it for Trump, and he bought the way they spun it. They were spinning it as the Bitcoin industry, by mining more and more Bitcoin, is going to help use U.S. energy production and make the U.S. more of an energy power. That's how they spun it to him, and he kind of bought that. He says the Bitcoin people can make us more energy independent. Well, yeah, but it's going to be very costly in terms of
ultimately, when we go into politics and we go into these ideas about these governments and the voting and how it changes things, I still come away with the feeling that it's a lot like yesterday. You know what I mean? That tomorrow is going to be a lot like today, and that there isn't a lot of change for the good from these governments because they're not great allocators of capital. So my last thing today is, I'm not sure there's a better way to allocate capital than in the markets. And I think that the private markets and some of the things that are going on with crypto and others, I still think are, not really markets, and there's no real value there. And I guess I would tell people that during the chaos or during any uncertainty in these next 6 months with disinformation, we should all just, hold and believe in U.S. companies that have led and will lead going forward. I still think they're the best companies in the world, and I still think we have some of the best thinkers and the best leaders in our business community. So
I 100% agree with you. And it's tech, but it's not just tech. There are other areas too where there's strong U.S. leadership, very strong companies, and certainly my portfolio includes a lot of tech as well as tech-oriented companies. And I hold no Bitcoin.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and I appreciate all your insights, Clem. You did a lot of work, and I think we will go from there. Our next podcast is going to be about Costco, and hope you can join us. Thanks again. Bye.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.